Okay, so we're still working on the live stream, but we are recording, so worst case, people get it on a slight time delay, but you will get it in real time. So welcome to the April 2018 edition of Ember NYC. I was asked before we got started how long we've been doing this, and it turns out it's 6 years this month, 2012, April, if I'm remembering right. Yeah, it's pretty awesome. Yehuda came, I drove with Yehuda from Philly to New York, and we did the first Ember Sprout Court / Ember meetup. We introduced Ember to everybody. It was a capacity crowd. It's the first time I met Alex, our first speaker. Yeah, and so it's been a wild ride since then. We've built many amazing things as a community. And excited to be here tonight. So we've got a great lineup. We've got we're going to do is 2 lightning talks. So the types of talks that we do at this meetup are kind of lightning talks and headline talks, I guess you would call it. The lightning talks are 5 to 10 minutes. They are a great way to either communicate an idea that doesn't need a full talk, or a great way for a first-time speaker to get up and get their sea legs speaking to a group. It's a very friendly audience, so if you are somebody who is kind of interested in speaking but pretty nervous about it, and you know some Ember, you should talk to me and I can help you get over that first hump. So there's lots of topics, whether you've been doing Ember for a little while or a long time, I can help you come up with a topic that will be great for the meetup. So I have a couple of announcements, and then we'll get right into the talks. The first announcement is a thank you. That's a thank you to our sponsors. Movable Link is where we are tonight. They've become our regular host in 2018, which is pretty awesome. And it's nice to have a home base again. As many of you know, we were at Pivotal for a long time, and then we were kind of floating around for a while. And so it's nice to be coming to the same space. So thank you, Movable Linkers. Appreciate it. Movable Link is growing like crazy and hiring like crazy. They do a ton of Ember, so you should talk to Spencer or anybody who's a Movable Link if you're interested in that. Also, I'll get a quick shout out to my company Yap that also sponsors, pays the meetup fee, makes my time available, and I think that's it on sponsorship stuff. Oh, if you are interested in hosting a project night, which are the other type of meetups that we do, these are smaller, hands-on, focus on a particular topic where we're really trying to use our laptops, experiment, learn from each other. You should talk to Jorge. Jorge, where are you? In the back. Jorge organizes our project nights, and we would love to come up with something that we can do at your office for that. Thank you, Alex. Cool. Okay, a couple of quick announcements. Number one is where we're at today with Ember is Ember 3.1. 1 is out actually now. Was released recently. The big exciting feature from my perspective is that this .get is optional in many cases. Yeah, it's pretty awesome. And we've just started experimenting with this at Yap, and I've just started reading some other code that has it this way, and it feels so different. It's awesome. It's like just so much less noise. Great stuff. So very excited about that. Ember Fest is happening October 11th and 12th in Amsterdam. Ember Fest is Ember's European International Conference. 2 things to know about this. One is tickets are available, I think. But the second is that the CFP is open. So you can propose a talk to Ember Fest rather, and go to Amsterdam and give it and have a fun time with lots of Ember people. Lastly, I wanted to mention a couple of community resources that you may or may not be aware of. The first is Ember Discuss, which is our forums, which have been getting quite active lately. Great. We've seen it's a little bit of a transition from Slack activity to this Ember Discuss activity. So if you haven't gotten the habit of checking this, I would encourage it. And then in Slack, there's tons of channels that you may not be aware of. One of them that I would like to point out is the local-NYC channel. where all things NYC can be discussed, Ember and NYC can be discussed, or even not. We were talking about city bike passes the other day, so a nice place to hang out on there. But there are tons of channels for anything that you are interested in. You should definitely avail yourself of the Slack. That's all I've got. Any announcements, community announcements? Gaurav, why don't you come up and grab the mic? By the way, these announcements could be an event that people might be interested in. You're hiring, you're looking to be hired, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we can get on this laptop here, the devswag.com. There is a V2 hoodie available, and we only need a few more purchased. We made it? We just... Okay. It's the V2 hoodie. I think you can probably search for it. Okay. Yeah. I would hope so. That would be awesome, wouldn't it? It means you can still buy it, but now it's actually going to be shipped to you for sure. If there was not 30 orders, no one would get one. So that's the reason behind me coming up here. But
good stuff. So you got 4 days left to order your Ember hoodie. Come on up, Jorge.
Hello. So I work at a company, and we call Infatuation, and we just acquired Zagat off of Google. And essentially, we're going to rebuild the whole thing. And I'm really pushing for Ember, but if I don't get enough people to join the company that wants to do it in Ember, we're going to default using React. So we're hiring, and I'm trying to build a mini army. So, yeah, come talk to me.
Awesome. So Jorge needs 30 Ember developers the next 4 days. Sorry, this is the wrong site. All right. So speaking of Jorge, I want to also make an announcement about the governance is probably too strong of a word, but the governance of Ember NYC. So I have, to date, it's been Jorge and I kind of running the show, and we've recently expanded the organizing team formally to include Sam and Ryan, who are working on our AV. And as well as Isaac Easer, I don't think is here tonight, but so that group of 5 is now responsible with enabling us to do more things better, hopefully, and back each other up. So that's exciting to me. A little less pressure on yours truly. And I had one other thing I wanted to say. Oh yes, this is tangential. This is just because I have the mic. So in addition to helping organize Ember NYC, I also help organize a Ruby conference here in New York called GoRuCo, Gotham Ruby Conference. This is our 12th year, and we just put together the speaker lineup this weekend, and it's awesome. It's pretty exciting. For those of you who know the Ruby community, the closing keynote is going to be by Aaron Patterson, aka Tenderlove, who's a great speaker and always doing fascinating stuff in the Ruby world. The rest of the talks are also pretty awesome and exciting. So my request is that if you are at a company that does Ruby, get yourself some tickets. They're on sale now, goruco.com. This is a volunteer community-run conference, and we need to get ticket sales moving to make it happen. So sort of along Jorge's theme of let's get stuff happening so we can have a conference. All right. With that, I'm going to turn the mic over and the lectern, I think that's what this is, over to our first speaker. He is Courtney Emeritus and still Mr. Router.
Yeah, sure.
Alex Machineer. Woo!
I've been standing in the back of the room with just this dumb grin on my face because this is going to be weird. I'm not totally prepared, and I think maybe like 5 minutes ago, Luke said something about maybe if you want to start talking at these meetups, you could get some mentorship or get some idea of exactly how you can get started in doing that. And let me just say that let this next talk be inspiration that it's okay to fail, and I think. I had some dumb joke lined up about how Babe Ruth had like a home run record and also like the record in horrible JavaScript presentations. I guess I told it. I'm sorry, guys. I'm going to get straight to it. Give me 10 seconds. We're going to open the QuickTimes. We're going to say new movie recording. It's going to hopefully magically switch to my phone, and I'm going to try to give a presentation via this cool app on the iPhone called Photos. Look at that. All right, anyway, my name's Alex, and I'm presenting a little quick lightning talk. It'll be really fast. There's too many slides and not enough demos and all sorts of things that aren't ideal. So constraint routers and NAB stacks. My name's Alex Machnier, Ember Core Team Emeritus. This is Ember NYC, and if you didn't know that, that's a picture, that's a little drawing of me. I go by A. Machnier and Makti because I'm in the middle of a rebrand. A coworker saw me drawing these slides and got a little bit jealous, and so wrote this counter intro slide with a bit of an inside joke about Mass Brothers, and I don't remember the joke. We are hiring at a company called Future Proof Retail, where I've been working at for the last 4 years, building mobile checkout, among other interesting apps that kind of push the edges of what Ember and Rails and other things are capable of doing. So just click the link at the bottom of the slide if you're interested in that. So again, constraint router and NAB stacks. Gosh, I should just look at one thing at a time, shouldn't I? All right, so basically here's the deal. I have been trying to use sort of default conventions with the Ember router, which is something I've been sort of actively involved in the last 5 years or so. And when I started building mobile apps, I found I had a really difficult time just using the conventions and feeling like I was doing the right thing. Usually Ember rewards you for staying on the happy path, but when it comes to mobile apps and apps where there's sort of a navigation stack where you're constantly pushing frames onto it and you want transitions to work and you want to be able to use web technology to model things that like native kind of gives you for free, I say from experience that Ember will kind of punish you unless you kind of jump through some hoops. And so I haven't really known how to fix that for a really long time, and I think I'm actually really close, but I'm not actually done doing it yet. So here are just some like wishy-washy, sketchy ideas that are probably going to make any of the core team members here nervous because I'm just injecting a bunch of hype, and it'll either not make sense or you'll get hyped up, and then people are going to ask about it. It's going to be really annoying, so I like have to actually deliver on this thing. Hold on. I forgot to change the timeout. This is supposed to be a lightning talk, so that's my punishment for sitting on a slide for too long. Anyway, so a constraint router is basically an iteration on the current router that lets you like route on more things than just like the URL, because Ember really tries to make you think about URLs first when designing your apps. And it turns out that not everything can go into the URL. So for instance, I've been trying to, my mental model around how to describe what my app does has been sort of in terms of thinking about what the Uber driver and rider app, both of them are different, but it's the same kind of problem set of an app that is like heavily driven by what the server says the state is. So if you're trying to fetch a ride and then the server says, we found a ride, now you're like, a driver is on the way. There's certain routes, if you want to think of it that way, that you're no longer able to see. And if you're in one of those routes, like such as a request ride or a request, a driver with a specific music set, which I think is a feature I just made up, it'll pull you out of that route and put you into a route that makes sense for like you're currently in a ride and all this stuff. And our app is really similar. Our app is mobile checkout where you can go into a store and start shopping and scan items on your phone and check out and skip the line. But there's definitely a concept of your purchase being like in an active state, and if it's ever abandoned over time, or you're getting help from somebody using the merchant app and they say like, okay, we're going to transfer you to the cashier because this app's totally broken, totally not a thing that ever happens in real life, then we need to basically architect our app in a way such that if the purchase state ever changes, which is going to be a change broadcast to us via WebSockets, our app's going to be smart enough to say, oh, you're no longer able to be in the like add items route. So that sounds like, you know, anybody who's an Ember developer would probably think, okay, I can probably think of some way to do that involving observers or some kind of WebSocket hook. Just trust me, it's really difficult. I promise you, it's just not something you just do. And I've got 4 years of being Mr. Router, I guess, to say it's actually difficult. So couldn't you just use something like, oof, that's another downside. Couldn't you, I got to speed this up. I'll blast right through this. Couldn't you use before model validations, right? That's like an async hook for you to load data and see if the data is there to even let you enter a route. No, because then you got to keep on checking out every single time, and then you end up duplicating something in your before model hook and elsewhere, and you got to implement all this logic that's like, okay, the data's changed. Can I still be here? If not, where should I go? It's a pain in the ass. Trust me, it's way harder than it looks. 5 years ago, Ember was saying things like, if you want to build an app that supports URLs, you got to think about URLs first, or else you're going to have a hell of a time bolting it on later. And I say something along the lines, quoting Zoe, very poorly drawn Zoe, that if you're building any sort of app that has real-time components to it, and it's going to has any kind of risk of being more real-time as the app evolves, you're going to be in a world of pain if you don't think about real-time sort of constraint routing stuff to begin with. I don't think anyone's going to believe me. Just take it at face value for the purpose of the presentation. I was getting a cramp on my hand when I wrote this slide. Constraint routers, what do? So it's basically when you enter a route, the constraint router knows intimately about this piece of data. Maybe it's a user authentication, maybe it's the current state of a ride, maybe it's the purchase if it's my app that you're building. And it is smart enough to know, like when the state changes, it runs validations again, and you basically program your router.map to say lots more stuff up front about like where it should go when these things invalidate, et cetera. And it's just in the basic principle of the more that you can teach Ember, the more that you can make declarative, the more that Ember can do for you. Next slide, NavStacks demo. This is really messy, and it's half broken, and it doesn't even really demonstrate everything I want to do. This is just proof that I'm actually working on this, and it's almost done soon. Here are some cool things about this. This is basically what's happening here is that I navigate or push different frames to this nav stack. If you were constraining this in like a liquid fire, whatever, you would only be seeing the most recently top template. And oh, wow, there's so many things to show here that are not really cool unless you've been banging your head against this for the last month like I have been. But basically what this is demonstrating is that you have this concept of concurrent routing. Every time that you push a new frame to this stack, you're actually in this post route at the same time that you're in the sign-in route. Usually Ember makes you think, oh, I'm in this route. Okay, I've left this route. Now I'm in this one. When you try to do something like this canonically difficult app, like you want to call Thai Greenpoint good because it's the good Thai food restaurant in Greenpoint, there's these mobile interactions that are just really hard to do in Ember. So for instance, look at this. Shit. Thank you. There we go. Just talking about Thai food in Greenpoint, just like, what? All right, so if I'm in the favorites app and I want to figure out who to call, look at this interaction. What is going on here? What is that? Are you in the first route? Are you in the second route? Have you started transitioning, but your finger's still on it, so you're controlling the liquid fire animation? Are you in, what is it? Like, this is not, you can't answer what this is in the current Ember router, so I've said, okay, this is going to be the most difficult thing that you can model with the Ember router, so like what needs to happen in order for this to be doable? And the answer is concurrent routing and layering in a sort of presentation layer on top of it where you can sort of tell a component that's currently being presented that it's active and it can like sort of adjust its presentation. And you can also do cool things involving animations such that, from 0 to 1, you can give this sort of parameter of like how transitioned between pages are you, and you can use it to control like look at this favorites thing at the top and how it sort of like shifts to the upper left. And this looks like an Ed Faulkner demo that like blows your mind like every year at EmberConf. So how would you actually do this if you have control over it? And you can't actually do this without concurrent routing and all this stuff. So I'm going to try to go back and like I'm sorry, this is wishy-washy. The other thing that's cool about this is that building this and preventing all these concurrent routes from having access to the same singleton controller meant preventing routes and frames from having access to the same pieces of data that cause really challenging problems with like data being clobbered. Like for instance, it's really difficult today if you're in an Ember route that's got a dynamic parameter and you're switching between users and they're all like writing to the same controller, and you've got to be really careful to clean up one before you start writing the other. It's a pain in the ass, it sucks. It's like 5 years ago, best technology, but we can do better. And you know, I feel like I've got some real ideas, man, that can like help this whole thing. So anyway, back to NavStacks. I'm sorry, this is probably just ridiculous. So concurrent routing, instead of transitioning between routes, you're in each of the routes at the same time. It builds a sort of data hierarchy and then figures out, you know, there's an application node in the first route, or in the first frame, there's an application route in the second. They're actually the same thing, so those will be shared, but your favorites route and detail route are different between them, so they're both these separate pieces of data that you can manage. I think a lot of people that have tried to model this kind of stack routing stuff before think like, okay, why can't I just use like the router.map and then like nest the sort of pushed frames as like child routes? And that's fine, but then you end up hardwiring lots of stuff and losing a lot of dynamicism, and it gets really difficult to say like, oh, this user doesn't have a credit card, so let's push on an add cart route, and then when they're done with that, it'll pop back to the previous page. Trust me, it's a pain in the ass. This is the Android pattern I was talking about, where you think you can just model a navigation stack using nested routes, but you can't, it's too hard. And so the mental model, which I plan to flesh this stuff out in the next 2 weeks or a month or something like that, it's all coming together really well, but you end up modeling your router.map as mostly flat things because these are all just individual routes that can push on the stack of concurrent routes, and it all works out to win. That didn't work out. There's too much. That's me crashing through the wall like Kool-Aid Man. That's Eric Brin saying hype, hype, hype. This is, part of this involves solving this async computer properties engine. It's a real thing. And maybe you can call this async glimmer references. Code is just data. Thanks. Sorry, we're hiring. That's it.
We don't have, what do you want to do about Mike? Just have him repeat the question? Yeah. Okay. Repeat the question.
Okay.
We'll start over with Gar. I don't have a working one.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to bring to mind a memory I had of another presentation we did here about Ember concurrency and how it was so great that it convinced all of us to switch to that right away. And basically my question is, can you come back and do that good a presentation on this?
Yeah, no, I wanted to point that out. Yeah, so the question is, Ember concurrency was a thing I presented on, but before I presented on it well, I presented on it really embarrassingly bad. So this is that version of that talk that I hope to give in a month.
Awesome. What happens when you refresh?
When you refresh, what happens when you refresh? All of your previous frame states are serialized into the URL, and it's smart enough to rebuild and relink all the pieces of data that are shared between frames, and they all just sort of, as a group effort, try and load all their data at the same time, and it handles errors gracefully, even though I haven't built it yet. It half works.
So is all of the state sort of URL?
Sorry?
The router is all of the state in the URL?
Is all the state in the URL, all the state that is like navigational. So knowing like what each URL is. Like there's a URL, basically a sub-URL in each frame in a JSON array serialized into the URL, so it can reconstruct your entire nav stack. Yeah, it's a little messy, but that part actually works. Any other questions? Rob?
Where's the RFC?
Where's the RFC? I have found that if you can write something as an add-on and show that it works and get community backing on it, then I don't know. It needs to live as an add-on for a long time before it becomes an RFC.
Are there other use cases besides just the mobile use case?
Excellent question. Are there other use cases beyond the mobile use case? Yes. Like, I've done a lot of work fleshing out what are all these like little primitives that are needed to basically make that really difficult transition, sort of interactive transition between frames work. And one is that there is this like async computed properties thing that people know that they want, but actually doing it right in a way that makes it possible. Oh, it's hard to describe. People don't know what they want when they say they want async computed properties, and there's all these different use cases and ways that you can change the behavior of what that would look like and be like, and that actually internally behaves the same way as all of like the weird error handling cases for this kind of concurrent routing. And basically, the current Ember router has like a really hardwired idea of how data loads. Like if you go into a deeply nested route, this route has to load its data. This one can't start loading this data until this one does, and this one does. And so generalizing that, that's another thing, is that there's no like hardwired waterfall with all of this stuff. Each frame and all the data that's inside of it knows exactly what it depends on to load, so you don't have to wait. There's no like built-in long waiting period. And solving that was really hard, but solving that was like solving async computer properties. I know this is all stuff that doesn't exist yet. I mean, it's half written and it's not like something that people can use, but I promise you it's like being solved. And the other use case is I realized that concurrent routing is something that you want to be able to do for modals, and being able to drive the navigation of where you are in a modal via a router.map. And part of what I had to do to even just get this stuff to work was to remake the router map API in a way that it doesn't just immediately write all of its data into this router.js micro library in a really difficult to query way. It like puts it into this easily queryable map that you can sort of export to router.js and also use it for your own needs to like query what are the route children of this thing, and then other use cases. So it's been really nice to have that as a queryable piece of data. And I mean, that's semi-related to the modal use case. But yes, it's really easy now to just like drive another thing that isn't the root application route via a router.map, and modals are going to be a really nice use case for that.
So first, I'll say as somebody, as you know, who's been dealing with these challenges around this, both in desktop and mobile for many years, thank you for working on this. It's awesome. It's way better than what I come up with.
Oh, no, who knows? I got to finish it.
And second question is, do you have an idea about how action handling works when you have concurrent routes?
How does action handling work? So I know that you are in the school of like fire and forget, and like having things bubble up the route hierarchy. Still more or less a good pattern. I don't know for sure how that's going to work, but here's one thing. Okay, so there's another thing that I didn't mention. I'm sorry for taking so long. Scope services. So when you inject .service in Ember, you are basically creating this global shared object that everything can inject, and including components, including different routes. And the more stateful that service is, the harder time you're going to have not clobbering it between routes and having to clean up after yourself. And you know, if you like Ember concurrency tasks, you can't really put it on a service if you want the lifetime of that task to be constrained by like the route you're on. You have to do other things to sort of clean up after yourself. So scope services are part of this thing, and I actually have it working because I'm operating off of a fork of Ember. And when you inject services into your frame, which is, you know, hype, it's a routable component, it's actually, when you inject this router into that service, it's a router that belongs only to that frame. It's a completely separate instance. And so that router, that frame has the ability to fire actions that are only handled, that terminate basically at that mini router that belongs to that frame that is responsible for only loading a single URL. And so I don't know whether we're still going to have this sort of like the bubbling kind of logic, or whether the way you invoke those actions is more direct, or maybe those actions are also injectable. It's more stuff I need to like play around with. But you at least have this sort of isolation that it's not, you know, because you're concurrently in all these routes at the same time, you don't have to worry about one hitting in the action that's on a, yeah. I'm really trying to keep like the shared objects and scope really isolated, and then you sprinkle in the stuff that needs to be shared.
Awesome. Anything else? All right, we move on. Thank you, Alex. Cool. So our next speaker, you can come on up and plug in, gave a talk at EmberConf during the lightning talk portions of EmberConf. this year. And it's pretty exciting for me personally because it described using an open source project that I work on in a way that I didn't know was being used. So that's pretty cool. And so today she's going to give us a more in-depth look at the work that she's been doing around deploying Ember apps. So I'll shut off my mic so the other mic will work now.
Can you hear me?
Ladies and gentlemen, Christina Kung.
Hi. Is this supposed to be projecting? Audio is fine. I just. Yeah. Should I? I can share it out. I apologize if this is the second time you've heard this talk, but I added GIFs, so hopefully that's better. And I'm also really well practiced in keeping this under 5 minutes. Leah was very clear it had to be 5 minutes at EmberConf. I don't need the intro slide. I can talk. So my name is Christina. I work at Condé Nast as the engineering director. We've been using Ember at Condé for over 5 years now, so that should tell you something, that you can have a single page web app on one stack for over, it will last longer than 2 years. And I've also been working there for 5 years, so that also tells you that engineers can stay at the same job for over 2 years. We use Ember to power our internal homegrown CMS. Yeah, whatever. Yeah. Oh, awesome, cool. Oh, okay. And so in that back picture is a screenshot of the CMS called Copilot. It is a multi-tenant application, so that means all of our US brands, 22 of them, all go to one single installation of Copilot to write and publish their content to the web. It's doing pretty well, so well that we're going to expand overseas to our sister company, Condé Nast International, which has another 80 markets, 80 brands to expand to. So we're going to have all these brands going onto one single installation of Copilot, and so that made us think, okay, we're going to have to rethink our deployment strategy so that we could ship features out to all these markets faster. And so what I didn't say in the beginning talk was I'm going to be talking about the Ember CLI deploy add-on, specifically the Lightning deployment strategy. A little bit about our current deployment. So let's say you're a Vogue developer and you just want to add a field to your article form, let's say like headline 2. In order to do that, since it's a multi-tenant application, you have to pull down the entire Copilot repository. You have to make that change, and when you push that change, our continuous integration server, Jenkins, does the following and runs an Ember test, runs an Ember build, and copies the assets over to our EC2 instance to be deployed to everyone. Then, to promote those changes to staging and production, you have to do this workflow all over again. This is not really ideal. It's kind of lame because we have to do this workflow over again in staging and production, and for us, an NPM install, an Ember test, an Ember build takes about 20, 30 minutes, so you're looking at over an hour to get like an urgent hotfix from your local machine to production. Additionally, there's no isolation of changes. So when that Vogue developer wanted to make one change to just their Vogue instance, they had to deploy the entire multi-tenant application out to everyone. The team thinks that we can do better, and so we looked at a couple different options, and we landed on Ember CLI Deploy, which is an add-on for providing a single interface for deploying your Ember applications. This add-on has a bunch of different plugins, which you can use for your particular infrastructure. In our case, we looked at a pack of plugins. In this case, it's Ember CLI Deploy Lightning Pack. And what that pack does is employ the Lightning deployment strategy. And just as an overview, the Lightning deployment strategy has 3 steps. It builds your Ember application. It deploys those to 2 different locations, one an S3, so that's like your bundle, and then it actually caches the index.html file to Redis. And then when you're done, when you're ready to like actually activate your version that you just deployed to Redis and S3, you just update the current pointer to your revision. In this case, in this example, it's 321B. So then for us, we really liked the strategy because it provided a lot of primitives to us. So what we did was break out the monolith into a bunch of different bundles. Inside the main core is the common functionality, which is the core functionality that houses most of like the search things that everybody uses. And then each brand gets its own deployment bundle. Everybody runs Ember CLI deploy when you want to make changes. And those spits out a bunch of building blocks that we can use to mix and match to finally build our final index.html file to be served out to our users. Concretely, what that means is on the left, these are the building blocks that we have. We know what is the current version of the core bundle. We know what is the current version of your brand bundle. And then we take those to kind of like placeholder in the index.html skeleton file, and then produces the file to your right. Now, with all these changes, this is what our current process looks like. Vogue developer wants to make a change to their article field. They only have to update their Vogue bundle, which produces those primitives to make our final index.html file, and then gets served up by our EC2 instances. Then the best part is whenever you want to promote that to staging and production, all you have to do is update the staging pointer and the production pointer. So that was success for us. We have instantaneous releases. We have independent and isolated deployments per brand, which really meant that we kind of broke up our really large app into multiple pieces. And then, I think that no deployment strategy is worth talking about unless it has zero downtime, which it does. And that's it. Thank you. I really encourage everyone to look at Ember CLI Deploy. It has really great resources. There's like an hour-long video of Luke talking about it, too. Again, my name is Christina.
Cool. Questions for Christina?
Yeah.
Bundles
Uh-huh.
for each brand. What are bundles?
Oh, so these are all independent Ember applications now.
Okay.
Yeah, so we actually serve up the brand bundle at a URL, at the S3 URL, and then we kind of like plug in that S3 location into the main index.html file that's produced by the core bundle.
Are these all Ember apps, I guess? Is the core thing an add-on that the apps consume, or they're kind of all apps?
They're all apps. Yeah, the brand bundles all, and we actually did this because we wanted our brand developers to be able to spin up their brand bundle, just their brand bundle, without pulling down core. So then what we have is like a test environment running in CI that, like, given the correct query parameter, can pull in your local running brand bundle. So you don't have to like worry about anything that's happening in like the main app. You just have to worry about your specific code that will get pulled in by this like test environment.
Cool.
No questions. Can you write a blog post about how Condé Nast uses Ember for all of their properties?
Yes.
Great.
Excellent. I have a question. So you mentioned that you started with Lightning Pack. Are you using Lightning Pack as is, or did you make your own plugin pack?
No, we just use as is.
Oh,
Yeah.
awesome. Okay, cool. Good stuff. Any other questions? Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to be back with Rob.
Okay, our next speaker needs really no introduction.
But you're going to do it anyways, right?
I'm going to try anyway. He showed up in the scene right around just before Ember 1.0, and he quickly became one of the most prolific contributors to Ember and to the Ember community. If you maintain an add-on in this ecosystem, I would put money on the fact that our next speaker has contributed a PR to it. Be it everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Please help me welcome to talk about testing, Rob Jackson.
Hello. Thank you, Ollie. You know how this works. All right, so a few things about this talk. First of all, got a little head congestion going on, so forgive me if I cough. Secondly, I expect heckling. If there's no heckling, I did a bad job. Thirdly, Luke is diligently taking notes, and he's watching the Slack, the local NYC Slack, for questions for me to answer, because there should hopefully have time for Q&A, assuming we didn't waste it all trying to make the video work. Sorry, Sam. So first of all, before we get into this title, I picked it on the fly. I thought that I would talk about things that would be modern and cool. Turns out nobody cares about testing, so, you know, it's fine. Other people gave better talks about testing since I picked this title, so I'm not really going to talk about all that stuff. Don't worry. A little bit about me. I'm on the Ember core team. I have a severe open source problem, and I work at LinkedIn. We're also hiring, so come see me. Tom's also there, and we'd love to talk to you. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my my open source problem before we get too far into the weeds. Well, more into the weeds. So a lot of people do things like open source because they are like magnanimous and like are being charitable and being helpful to other people. I only do anything out of guilt, just complete utter guilt. I just feel horrible all the time, and I feel bad that this person, person XYZ on the internet has a problem, and I know the answer and I didn't tell them, and they are having a horrible day because it's my fault. Anyways, that's how I think about this stuff. So before we go too far, I always like to thank my family. They put up with me. They humor my bizarre hours and over open sourcing, and let me do the stuff that I do. So thank you to them. Thanks to Luke. Luke has had me come down and speak a few times now, 3 or 4 times. I don't know exactly how many, at least 3. Every time I come to New York, it is awesome. I want to say the very first Ember NYC talk I gave was the largest group of people I spoke to. At that time, not since, but at that time. It was somewhat intimidating. The community here is always awesome and welcoming. And I want to tell anybody, I think we're going to go somewhere afterwards. If you haven't met me in person, shake my hand, or I don't know your name, you should come up and introduce yourself. I would love to talk to you, see what you're doing, see what you're up to. I'll talk your ear off about all sorts of annoying and useless things. It'll be great. So first, we're going to go a little history lesson. So I started preparing for this talk, and only a couple of days ago, and I looked, and I'm like, I feel like I've talked about this stuff before. And it turns out I gave a talk here at Ember NYC exactly a year ago, well, a year and a month, and I talked about testing the future today. And that's me down there in the bottom, see? I think I'm wearing the same shirt. It's great. So what did I say? I washed it since then. So what did I say? So now we're going to do a little presentation in a presentation, a little meta here. Shout out to Alex. I'm going to beat you. So this is what I said then. So all of these weird cream-looking slides, I do not have Nightshade on, so it is just cream slides. So I talked about acceptance, integration, and unit tests. I showed, this was state-of-the-art at the time. This is like what you could do. This is great. You have acceptance tests, and then visit, click all the handy little helpers. Then you got integration tests. These are like component integration tests where you're like rendering snippets. You're using jQuery to trigger clicks, and you're asserting on the test output. Great. Unit tests, similar. You look up a thing, you call some methods, you muck with your objects in a way that is totally unnatural, and move on. So then we're done. The end. Okay, keep going. All right, so there was a bunch of issues. I went through them then. There's been other talks talking about like why we need to do better and we need to figure things out. But all of the original acceptance test API was like globals based and built for like the land before time, the land before build tools, the land before I got involved in Ember, and then there's a bunch of like magical, like weird implicit promise chainings, shenanigans going on, and you have no control about what's happening, and it's just this big ball of messy promises, and you have no idea what's going on. You also got no way to stub or mock services. If you have, like, you want to replace a given service in testing, you have no choice. Integration tests at the time, they're like completely ignored async altogether. Like, if you did async, good luck. And that meant rendering. That meant if you did Ember data requests or anything like that, you're just off on your own little island and trying to bail the water out of your boat. Well, if you're in a boat, you're not an island, but you know what I mean. So, all right. So, yeah, okay. So then I wrote this RFC. This was 2 years ago. So you got to put yourselves in my position. A year ago, I gave a talk about a thing I had written a year before. Now I'm giving the talk again 2 years later. And remember how guilty I felt about everything, or still do, actually. But this RFC was, at the time, so those of you that have been around and on the internet for a little while, there was a service called usecanvas.com. I loved them. I am really sad that I can't use Canvas anymore. But at one point in time, this document was a Canvas document, and I had the single most edits of any Canvas doc in the system until they shut it down. It was a lot of words. It was a lot of stuff. It had everything, the kitchen sink and the baby and the bathwater. All the stuff was in this thing. And it never shipped. Remember, this was an original slide. So a year ago, this still hadn't happened. Now Duke Nukem Forever actually did ship. But this was like famously the promised version of the game that never shipped, but then they eventually did anyways. It's just vaporware, right? That was the thing. Like this whole thing, I wrote it. I envisioned it. I talked about it. I was very excited about it. I'm passionate about it, but it didn't exist. And at the time, I felt really bad about it. Okay, fast forward to today. So still history stuff. This is what they look like. Also, way better slides. Sorry, old me. Okay, so I showed you all that stuff before in the flashback slides that I injected. Same stuff. Okay, so now, today. So Tobias gave an awesome talk at EmberConf. I will link, or I'll tweet the link to this, but you can find the EmberConf 2018 videos are all online. They're on YouTube, I think, and you can go and you can pull it up. He did an amazing job explaining the new testing APIs, so I don't have to. So you should go watch that talk. Just a quick rundown, though, because otherwise, what am I doing here? This is the new style. You import setup application test. Notice, very importantly, and I'll tell it here, and it'll be on record theoretically. The reason we shifted from the proposed language is from acceptance tests to application tests is because, importantly, it isn't up to me, the framework author or the testing library author, to say what the hell kind of test you're writing. If you could totally write an acceptancy test in the old unit style, right? Like you could look up a thing and you could kick off the whole world, and it's touching the entire application and it's going through the whole flow. It's not up to me to say this is an acceptance test or this is the integration test or unit test.
What's the difference?
Don't ask. The point is the words unit, integration, and acceptance are just a landmine of argument. We should talk about which is better, Vim or Emacs later.
Okay.
It's basically the same thing.
It's obviously Vim, that's fine.
Okay, we'll have words. It's fine. So, anyways, the idea is we're using the new QUnit syntax. We're doing nested modules. You can clearly see in this test where the specific parts that I'm using are coming from. Setup application test is coming from Ember QUnit. That's a special QUnit wrapper. Module is coming from QUnit itself. I'm missing some imports here. It should be importing test as well. Visit and current URL should also be imported. Whatever. Horrible slide maker. Here's better. So again, in this case, you're doing a rendering test. You import, you can see exactly the Ember test helpers are providing render and click because those are Ember specific behaviors. Ember QNITs providing the QNIT integration for the rendering test, and then we're leveraging like async await to get nice async interop, which is glorious. Async await is the single best feature added to JavaScript since ES5. Full stop. I'll arm wrestle you for it. I'll win. So, and then this would be like what a basic test would be like. You can just look up an object and invoke stuff on it. I don't have a ton of use for these, but it is really important that the system's composable and you can do roughly all of the things in a plug-and-play manner. Now, one of the issues that we had with the old API was that it was really hard for add-ons or other collaborators to integrate with the system. Like, how does something like Ember Power Select provide a custom select box helper, right? Well, the way they did it was you have to import the thing and for side effects, and it would mutate the global state, and now you have a global helper, and that's kind of bananas. So Mirage was similar, only in Mirage's case, they would hook in the server start with an initializer, or an instance initializer, actually. So every time you booted the app, it would kick off the Mirage server. So anybody that had written an older module for component test and happened to want to use Mirage are familiar with the song and dance of manually importing the start Mirage thing from the initializer file and invoking it yourself. And that feels like shenanigansy. It doesn't feel great, right? So now you can easily compose, but look, this is a rendering test, and then I'm going to set up Mirage. It's all great. And it's all hooked up, and it's clear where all the things are coming from and who's responsible for what parts, and there was much resourcing. This is the Power Select example, and you can see in Ember Power Select, it just provide now a helper that you import and you can invoke. There's some work that Miguel had done and others that make it so that oftentimes the helpers can work interoperably between the old world and the new world, so that you can continue to use the same acceptance tests or integration tests that you had before, and then you can slowly start migrating one at a time or use a code mod or something from the older setup to the newer one. But importantly, it was a gradual progression. It wasn't like a cliff that you have to fall off of and good luck. It's not a Ember 0.9 context shifting situation. Shots fired, y'all. This is another good example. This is a Pact add-on. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. Pact, this just shows how the Ember CLI Pact plugs in with the same system, lets you specify some options, and supports the same sort of interface and API.
What is a Pact?
I'm going to talk about it later. The short version of the revamp is the APIs amongst all the test types are consistent to the point where it's very clear, like there's very little difference between a rendering test today and an acceptance test or an application test. The only difference is that you would use visit in an application test because it's actually going to do routing. And in a rendering test, you give it a template snippet. The entry point is different. Everything else is the same. You still have click. You have all the fill in or a trigger key event, or all those helpers still exist, and all of the lands. And so you can sit down, you can learn one style, and you just know it. There's not a bunch of jumping back and forth or loading the context twice. It's pretty discoverable when you're looking at a file. You can actually figure out either if there's a bug or I don't really know what this helper does. It's really clear where you go look to see what the heck it does, right? You can see the name where you imported it from. You go look at that add-on. You can follow along. And hopefully it has good docs, and you can see what it's providing. And it's modular and composable so that you can have multiple add-ons providing their own test helpers and test support in a way that makes it both clear and very simple to do the various combinations that you would need. Okay, so what's the future look like? I will get out my crystal ball, and I'll tell you the things that I currently feel guilty about not having shipped. It's a relatively short list in this context. The first one is probably the biggest total workload, like amount of work, but I don't think it's that far off. And this is engine and fast specific APIs for testing. So now that we have sort of cleared the field on the standard runtime realm of testing, we should start tackling the also rans, and the engines and fast boot tests today are things that most people, when they do them, either they don't do them, or when they do them in everyone does their own thing, and it's very ad hoc, and you're just struggling to figure out how to do it. We should provide guidance. We should have a set way. It should be much better. The specific APIs that I'm envisioning for engines would essentially boot the engine just like your normal app flow would boot it. So unlike the old integration test style, where you would provide a custom resolver and then everything you look up would come from that resolver, I actually think it's very important that you boot the engine the same way the app would boot it, because you'll have services passed down from the host app. You have event dispatching that's set up by the host app. There's a whole bunch of interaction that you lose when you're like, go do an end around and just start the engine directly. And it makes your tests not reflect reality. And that, unfortunately, has bitten me very hard in the past. So it's pretty important not to do that. On the fast boot side, the APIs that we're thinking about and playing with are twofold. First, it's very trivial to start fastboot in Node land, in a QUnit test in Node, in a Node file, and start fastboot and call visit directly in Node, and you've got HTML and you can assert on the output. That's very simple. There are some slides I have later on showing how that looks, and it's not hard at all. I personally think we can also go a step further, and we can actually provide a middleware and let you run browser tests that hit the fastboot server, get the payload back, don't boot the app, but let you do regular DOM assertions that you're familiar with, like with assert.dom or query selector, like normal stuff, without using like Cheerio or JSDOM in Node. Look for an RFC for those two things coming soon, hopefully. The next one is add-on entry points. Now, this is a thing that was in the original RFC, but it's roughly the idea that sometimes add-ons have code that they want to run before each test, or before all the tests, or after all the tests are done. For example, Ember Lifeline is a add-on that I manage along with some coworkers that helps you sort of tame lifetime entanglement in a way that's not quite as good as Ember concurrency, but it's a nice little stepping stone until you can get there. And it's important in Lifeline's case to make sure that you've actually cleaned up your object. You've actually ran the destruction, or you have a leak, which is very bad. So, for example, we set up a custom integration in Lifeline that ensures at the end of the test suite that all of the registered destroyables have been invoked. It's really simple. It's just a counter, but it really helped. It helped us catch a number of bugs in our app where we had forgotten to call super in destroy or will destroy, for example. Things like that. Very trolly bugs that we should never have made to begin with, but they were hard to find. But the way we had to do it in Lifeline today is we had to use custom QUnit hooks to hook in to the lifecycle, which means that the library is now somewhat tied to QUnit specifically, which is a thing we'd rather not have to do, though QUnit is clearly better than Mocha. But anyways, it's still very important from a framework perspective to support many runtimes. So the idea here would be you'd get some hooks. There'd be an established location where you can put a file in your add-on, like add-on test support / entry pointer. Who knows? Some name, I'll find out. It'll be a good one, I promise. And then we'll have those methods will be called, regardless of test framework. All the testing frameworks have a concept of before each or after each, those things. So we'll plug into those. It'll be great. The last one is something I think that Ryan actually has an open PR for, but this is a common entry module. So before we migrated to the new system, we actually had this, and we didn't realize how nice it was until we didn't have it, and it's very annoying. So for example, in today's world, if you do a blueprint generation to generate a component test or an application test, then you have you're going to import setup rendering test or setup application test directly from member key unit. That's great. It's very clear where that's coming from. It's awesome. What happens when you want to, in every test, stub a service? Like maybe you don't want to hit the payment endpoint, right? Well, shoot. Now you have to either do custom setup in every single test file, and you better hope you don't forget because you're going to be sorry. Or the proposal is to have a app local setup rendering test, setup application test that just invokes the main one, but it's a place for you to put the common logic. So there's no open PR. The only reason it's not landed is because I haven't written the RFC for it. But hopefully I can get that done. We can get that out there soon. And then update the blueprints. There's no functional change to how the tests run. It just gives you a nice funnel, a nice place to put common testing logic. Okay. All right, so now we're going to enter into the Q&A stage. So I mentioned at the beginning of the talk that you should all be thinking of questions to ask regarding testing or roughly anything I've touched on tonight. I asked this question on the forum, discuss.ember.js.com, which you should all join and make sure you pay attention to. You can subscribe if email is your method of distraction. You can subscribe and it'll have you automatically email you. You can get digests. You can just leave a tab pin and it'll send you little notifications. It's great. It's a wonderful app. It's also an Ember app. And I really like it. I'm trying to convince more people to use it. That means y'all. So I expect to see that many more views tonight. So, all right. So I asked a question on the forum, and I said, hey, I'm going to give this talk. I'm lazy. Please give me your examples of things that I can try to talk about because I'm lazy. So the first one was someone who did not follow directions at all. I said in the tweet, I said, please comment in the forum with examples. And they just tweeted back at me with the example. But nevertheless, we have compassion. I submitted this today as I was prepping the slide. Basically, the problem here is that window.find is actually a function, and it kind of does the thing, but it's totally not what you want, and it's not the thing you want to do at all, ever. But since the old global API just assumed that it would clobber window.find anyways, people commonly forget to do the import or get trolled by, why is find working? Like, it doesn't show as a linting failure, like this is not a function, but it doesn't do the thing you expect it to do, and it's very confusing because it's running a function. It's not like undefined is not a function. It totally runs. It's very trolly. So I submitted this PR. Once I fix, there's one test failure because of stupid things that I did. But essentially what's going to happen is we'll clobber window.find before the test and reset it afterwards so that people aren't trolled like I was. It's very confusing when you have the scenario. And I know how all the pieces put together, and I spent a long time on it. Okay, so this is another really common one. A bunch of people brought this up. I have this huge acceptance test suite, and it's really slow, and that sucks. What can I do? The thing that I would say you do is, pat yourself on the back for writing lots of good tests. That's the first thing. So I started looking at what is slow. Another theme that I noticed in these reports was that my acceptance tests are slow, but my integration tests are very fast and they feel light and it's great. So I started looking at the two pathways and figuring out what is the difference here. And in the new testing realm, there is no difference, right? We still run the initializers, we still run the instance initializers, we still create the owner instance the same way. All of that is the same. The only thing we don't do is do routing when you do a rendering test. That's the only difference. All of it is exactly the same pathway as a normal app would go when it boots on the page which is actually quite important. That was a fundamental principle of the redesign, but there's no difference. So why does it seem like acceptance tests are so much slower? I don't have an answer. Anyways, so I started digging into this. Sorry, leading questions. So I started digging into this. So I wrote this thing, and I just run this test. And I had the index route just has a button on it. I click it, and then it does a transition to. It's a super simple, silly, simple thing. So in Ember 3.1, you run that thing. It runs like 1,007 tests because apparently 7 of them are linting. I have 7 files or something. I don't know. And it took 141 seconds. And like as you can see from the test, it's like doing nothing. Like what the hell? This is kind of sad, right? And even if we split this and run like Ember exam on this, because it's all in the same module, it's all going to run once in one partition anyway, so it won't do us any good. Anyways, so I started looking at this, and I'm like, why is that slow? Like, it does seem like it shouldn't take that long for that simple thing. I know that there's not that much processing happening. So the first thing I did, so I looked at a profile, and I noticed that there's 70% idle time in that while those are running. So then I upgraded to Ember 3.2, and just by upgrading Ember, that's it, I dropped like 32% off the total test time. So good job, Ember. So it turns out in Ember 3.2, we've tried to land it in prior version. We tried to land it in 3.1, but it got bumped because there were some bugs left. But in Ember 3.2, we transitioned Backburner's auto run to use microtasks. So it uses basically promise.then to enter into the microtask instead of set timeout. And that saves roughly 4 milliseconds every time you do an auto run. And there's lots of auto runs, so it shaved a bunch of time off the total test time. And I thought that was great. So then after I isolated and figured out that why it was faster, it wasn't immediately clear why it was faster. So I dug in, I did a bisect in Ember to figure out what commit in between 3.1 and 3.2 did it. And then it made me think, well, we're also doing some set timeouts in the test harness, and specifically around because the various click and fill in and whatnot async helpers always do a set timeout to enforce asynchrony, because the prior versions did not force asynchrony. There was ways to trick it into being synchronous, which was literally the entire point of promises that we completely screwed over. But anyways, don't get me started. So anyway, so I started looking into what if I change a similar thing in the test harness. There's a PR there. It's still a work in progress. I need to add some tests. I need to do some more cross-browser testing. Specifically, so I test this library in IE11 is the lowest I go in IE. And I unfortunately have to boot that up locally. And I was only at 20% battery, and I didn't do it. But anyways, we'll make sure it works. But it drops another 20-something seconds, right? So it goes from 140 seconds to 74 with roughly nothing you had to do. So yeah, and there's still like 40-something% idle time when these tests are running. So there's still room for us to finagle things and tweak some things. Anyways, that doesn't answer the question at all. That was just this is how my mind works. So the real answer is using things like Ember Exam, which will help you split your tests. The Ember Map folks have a great video up on Ember Exam. They talk about how it works, but roughly what it does is it lets you split your tests up into multiple partitions. You can do as many partitions as you want, and then run them in parallel. And what that does is launch multiple Chrome instances. It just runs those splits, basically. It doesn't really make your test go faster, but wall clock is faster, right? The actual time that you have to sit there and wait is much faster.
What clock do you go by on wall clock?
Internal clock. Yeah, when you grow up, you get an internal.
Wow.
So that's one thing. The other thing is test things at the right boundaries. So I think one of the examples given in the forum was like, well, most of the things that I'm testing have like a current user, and they care about a current user. So we're commonly testing those from in like a full routing, like visit this URL, log them in perspective. But sometimes that's not needed, right? Sometimes it's fine to have a shared helper function to set up a user to initialize it into an initial state, and then you can test a individual component level. Now, the component like rendering tests and application tests have the same setup as I said before. They're not inherently faster or slower, but running more code will always be slower, right? So if you run your routing layer and you do all of your queries, it's going to take more time than if you don't do any of that. In the cases where you can, if you have things isolated down to simple component boundaries, the components have APIs, do rendering tests, pass the things that you need to into the components, and it'll be much easier to test those things as well. And your coworkers will thank you the next time they try to use that component because they'll actually be able to see what the hell the API is. Okay. There's a crying gumdrop on this slide, I think. So this is basically like, the run loop is horrible and it's the bane of my existence and I am crying. So a few other people put this on here, but I already feel this way. So let me talk about some things about the run loop. First of all, for those of you that don't know, the run loop is roughly the thing that powers a lot of the coalescing that happens behind the scenes in Ember to prevent forcing the DOM to update when it shouldn't, or like schedule things to happen in the future, that kind of stuff. So the first thing that I would suggest that y'all read is there's a really great post on the forum where someone asked a question like, I get this error about there's this auto run assertion. You changed something that caused side effects in your test and you didn't have a run loop. So what the person was asking, what does that mean? We tried to dig into it. I think Ed Faulkner, myself, Jonathan Jackson, a few other folks have chimed in. But it's a great read. I spent a bit of time trying to do like a little code safari to like step through what exactly is happening when you set a property and how it triggers a re-render and how that all works. The answer wasn't even what I thought originally. I actually made a mistake and corrected it later in the thread. But the short version is, when you do something in that causes something scheduled to re-render or update, you will have you'll get an error if you're not in a run loop. That sucks. This means basically if you use async await in your app code and you don't wrap the other part, like the parts after the await in run loops, you're going to get screwed. And it's really annoying, and we totally need to fix it. So I have like a pseudo RFC put together that I am working on, which is roughly embrace the auto run, and the pitch is to remove that assertion completely. The reason for the flushing that exists today is literally because promises did not exist at the time the APIs were designed. We didn't have the same concept of asynchrony or managing asynchrony. The best they had at the time was like callback hell, which is obviously horrible too. And I think now with async await and promises, even without async await, we have plenty of ways to deal with this ourselves already. So the reason run flushes synchronously is specifically because in a test they wanted to be able to say set this property and assert the output without doing callbacks. Because promises weren't a thing, you couldn't do a dot then. There was no way to deal with a render that's going to happen sometime in the future. So the whole point of the system is to fake Ember out into forcing a synchronous render, which is totally a thing we never actually do in production. So you can test things in a completely artificial way, and that's horrible. So we should fix that. We're working on it. You should read the thing, chime in on the thread. I linked this from that Discuss post as well. Okay, testing intermediate states. That's not exactly the question that was posed, but I'm going to take a little bit of artistic license. So basically the question was, how do I test something that's in a loading state when the normal helpers would wait? Like if you did a wait click a thing, they would normally pause the test until that thing is completed. How do you test the state in the middle before it continues? In the older style acceptance tests that Ember provided since 1.x, it was literally impossible to do. You could not do it. That was horrible. So in the newer style, there are ways to do it. They're still not quite as ergonomic as I want them to be, but I don't think they suck. They're just using the building blocks in the tests that we put together. So in this example, we visit a route, we click submit, but notice we don't await on the click. We could grab that click promise and await for it later, but I chose to go with await settled later myself. It works the same, but that's just how I did it in this test, in this example. So you can see we wait for the thing to show up. We assert its test, assert that it exists, and then we assert that it goes away. So importantly, the wait until and wait for helpers do not wait for settledness. They explicitly only wait for the condition you provide them. So if you call wait for and you give it a selector, and sometimes it has other options like passing a count, like how many of that selector do you want, those kinds of things. But when you call it, it's only waiting for that one condition. It's not waiting for all settledness. It's not waiting for the route hooks to finish. It's not waiting for any scheduled run laters. It's just waiting for that one thing.
Aren't these two a little tautological?
Yes. However, the thing I forgot was, so if you had a test and it didn't run the exists, but it ran that didn't exist, your test wouldn't fail unless you had an assert a spec, right?
But I'm saying if you are awaiting for the thing to exist and then testing that it exists, you could never enter that state because it's
Yep. Yeah. You're saying that, yeah, the assertion could be, the assert dom exists could be removed. Yes, totally agree. Because the wait for would throw an error if it times out after X time. I don't.
invoice you or link it?
What's that? It's all the same. Yeah. Okay. Good job, though, Tom. All right. So engine tests. I mentioned this before. There are some workarounds. There's some talk in the thread about like what people are doing today to get the engine testing and working. And here's an example. This is kind of horrible, but like you got to do what you got to do to get things done right now. But this basically makes a fake resolver for with the fallback to hit the engine. It looks for the thing in the app, and then it falls back to the engine. Now, the reason this is bad is because it totally commingles the namespaces of the host app and the engine. And in these tests that use this thing, if your engine tries to invoke a component that happens to exist in the host app, the test will work. But when you deploy that application, it will totally not. So these sort of workarounds are the reason why engines are so high a priority right now. Like getting good testing patterns for engines is so important right now. All right, so I also mentioned fastboot tests. Here is the snippet I promised around fastboot. Specifically, this is a thing that Ed Faulkner had put together, but this is a node test, which is why you can't use module, because module is a reserved word in Node. Thank you.
Use Mocha.
Okay. It's, okay. So what this does is it sets up a fastboot instance, boots the Express app, and then actually communicates with it back and forth and asserts on the final HTML. And this sort of test is actually straightforward to read, like you can understand what it's doing. It's not quite as ergonomic as I want to make it, but this is a really great start. And I think we can distill a lot of this stuff down into some helpers and some shared stuff that the MRC Live Fastboot add-on can provide in the app.
It seems like a really well thought out, low level primitive API that people can use to build more expressive abstractions on top.
Hey, who put that together?
I don't know, but whoever did, clearly.
I see. Anyways, so look forward to something like this coming to Fastboot near you. All right, so passing models into components. So now this is another example that Alex LaFrosia put together. The question was, what do we do when I have a component that takes a model, like an Ember Data model, and has to, as an argument, in a rendering test, I don't necessarily want to have to go to Mirage and pull the thing out, pull data. So what do? How do I pass it? One of the things that I want to point out before getting too far into it is if you ever pass an async function to ember.run, you're joking. It doesn't work. You can't do it. There's no promise awareness of ember.run at all. So it looks cool to write async, and it looks cool to write await, but it has no meaning at all.
Wait, doesn't Ember run return whenever you return from function?
Oh, shit.
Damn it!
Oh,
You got me, Luke.
oh shit.
Snap.
Wait, when you return?
Yeah, no, he's right. So the promise gets returned here to the, oh, damn it. Damn it! Yeah, so the promise gets returned to the U8. Okay, thank you, Luke. And I'm sorry, Alex. Anyways, so I talked to some of the Ember Data folks about this. Basically, the rough suggestion is to use, look up the store and use push to create a record, and instead of necessarily doing a request to find it.
There's actually a great add-on called Ember Data Factory Guide
Mm-hmm.
that actually lets you create Ember Data models in a similar factories way as Mirage.
Nice. Okay, I'll have to go look it up. Sounds good. Okay. So Tom, I told you earlier. I told you about the pact thing, and I didn't have a slide about it. It's my fault.
I was noticing that.
So the short version is pact is essentially a contract. It is like what you can do with Swagger, if you're familiar with Swagger, but it effectively lets you test the contract between the API and the front end. So Ember CLI Pact is it's a standard thing. It's not a thing invented internally. It basically dumps a specific format to disk when you do these interactions, and then you run a similar test on the API, and you confirm that the results are equivalent. So it's essentially a way to do to ensure the end-to-end integrity that is functional.
Do we use that?
We do not. But it's a really nice pattern. The Salsify folks are like spearheading the work on that add-on. It's looking great. I saw a presentation by Dan Freeman on it last night at the Boston Ember meetup. It is on YouTube. You can go look it up. It, I think, is actually on the Ember NYC video feed, if I am not mistaken. But it was a great talk, and it's really exciting. So that's all I have together, but you now have had a ton of time to think of questions to ask me.
That Pact add-on works right now?
Yes?
That's cool.
I believe it does.
I haven't heard much about it. That's cool. I mean, that's up my alley, you know?
Yeah, I believe it does, yeah. I mean, there's other techniques to I was preparing that slide, which I apparently forgot to include, for a question where someone asked, like, how do I do end-to-end testing? Like, how do I actually make sure, like, it's great that I'm doing all these mocks, but, like, in reality, like, I'm hitting a server and things happen differently. How do I test that? There was also a great blog post on the Dockyard blog about how they did it with their Elixir Phoenix setup, and it was great. So there's been a number of things in this space. I personally like the pact concept, where you can sort of still be independent. You can still have your different systems, and just here's the contract of the two things to compare. But there's a bunch of options. Yes, sir.
I would like to ask the first question. Can you talk a little bit about when errors occur in your app during a test? What happens, and when do you want to test the case when an error occurs in your app?
What is your Ember version?
Yes.
So the reason I asked is because there were a number of bugs that I introduced in Ember 2.11.3 patch release, mind you, and they stayed around for quite a long time until 2.17. So the TLDR is that if you threw errors in a run loop, we would dispatch the errors to the wrong place. That's the short version. There's workarounds. There's ways to deal with it in either location. But I will tell you the answer that I want you to do going forward. So because you're probably on 2.18 or 3 or something now. The right thing to do would be to use a add-on that I wrote called Ember Test Friendly Error Handlers. Sorry, Ember Test Friendly Error Handler. You should make sure I said that right. There's a lot of words there. I could have gotten it messed up. But the short version is it provides you with it wraps a callback that you provide, so that in testing, your on error or your like catch handler rethrows appropriately, unless you're explicitly testing the testing case. Because most of the time you want that thing to rethrow, except for when you're actually testing that, oh, hey, when the API sends a 500, like all hell doesn't break loose, there's some recovery shown, like maybe an error page is shown in the app or something. So you don't have to use that add-on. It does a very simple thing. All it's doing is letting you control in the test whether you want to squelch errors, like swallow them or not, right? It's just a little API that we put together to do it. You can do the same thing in your app. It's not any magic. It's just a convenient wrapper. The ember.test.adapter.exception method is not what you want. It is the devil. It is gone now as of Ember 2.17 and higher. The basic gist is any errors thrown inside of a run loop, which is roughly anything thrown in an RSVP promises callback or in a regular run wrap thing, are going to be dispatched to ember.onAir. So if you want to assert, for example, that rendering this component throws in its init, you would set up an ember.onAir in the test, you would put your assertion inside that function, and then you would clean up that function in your after each. That is the basic gist. Now, you might imagine that you would prefer to write try catch around await render, and I agree, that's just not possible today. There may be a time where it is possible, but right now the returned promise from render isn't entangled with the literal rendering that's happening, so the error is thrown out of band of the promise and therefore doesn't get populated back to the right place. It's totally a thing we can fix. It's just non-trivial to wire it all together.
How far that add-on, is that backwards compatible to the Windows?
The add-on is backwards compatible. The add-on does, like I said, a really simple thing. It's literally just an if conditional in a function, and it either calls the callback or it doesn't. It works back to, like, I test it back to 2.8, 2.4, or something. Like, I don't know exactly, but it's unrelated to Ember version. The reason I asked about the Ember version is because we didn't dispatch errors to ember.onAir appropriately between 2.11 and 2.17 when errors were thrown in the run loop during a test. They were dispatched to test.adapter.exception instead, and they shouldn't have been. That meant that you couldn't, for example, do a try catch around a run loop and have it actually call a catch. It never would run. It was very trippy. Yes, sir.
So what is your opinion going forward about using RSVP promises versus native promises? And how can we get an Ember application today to use native promises instead of RSVP promises without particularly putting an exclude line in our Babel RC?
Okay, let me distill that. So the question is, there's a few questions. First one is, how do I feel about native promises versus RSVP promises? The answer is complicated. RSVP promises have slightly different behavior when used in Ember. When used in like NodeLand outside of Ember, they are a very, very good promise polyfill. When used in Ember, we wire them into the run loop in a way that makes them less great. But it's importantly so that you don't have to manually call ember.run in all of your callbacks. So there's a good reason why we do the thing we do. It's just slightly annoying that you can force a promise to be synchronous. It's like that is a thing that I fundamentally think should not be possible. But anyways, that is neither here nor there. The other question was, why can't we use, I think the other question was, why can't we use native promises? The answer is, if you do use native promises, you can use native promises, totally fine. We still ship RSVP with Ember just because of the way we bundle today. That does not have to be true forever. As a matter of fact, I totally want to be there where we don't have to ship RSVP if your target browsers all support a native promise. Now, if you have to support I11, you're screwed. You still got to send, because there's no promises in I11. But if you're only supporting evergreen browsers, which hopefully most people are, then we can get to a point where we don't ship RSVP. Right now, the pain point is if you're using native promises only, or async await, because async await is using a native promise, untranspiled async await, then you are going to have run loop assertions in your tests in ways that are very, very annoying. And the only solution for them is sprinkling ember.run throughout your production code, and that is not a solution in my mind. So you should still continue to use RSP promises, but look toward that proto RFC that I've written that I mentioned earlier in the thing, because that's exactly what it's about. The entire thing is about, hey, async await is the best thing since sliced bread. Why can't I use it? And I go on to like expound the history of why, and then I make a pitch. The first step of the pitch was that Ember was that Backburner needed to use microtasks, and I showed in the other test when I was playing with acceptance tests, I showed that the we landed that, right. Step 1 is there, right. There's other steps, there's other issues. Like for example, even though we're using microtasks to progress amongst the queues in Backburner, we do not handle infinite interleaving of promises. So for example, if you had a very deep promise chain, there would be a time when we would end up completing the run loop before all the actions were done, right? So because there's the microtask queue, which is where the things are running, will run to completion, and any individual task can schedule something else to run in the same run. So we can never know that we're at the end. Like there's no end, right? Anyways, sorry, that was very in the weeds. The answer is I want that too. All right. Who's next? Go.
Did you hear that thought from back to you on purpose? Are you that good?
Yeah. Yeah. That's what happens when you become like a 7th Dan open source addict.
Just had to wait for it.
Yeah, wait the turn. Yes. Yes, that was great.
Speaking of which, you made an offhand comment about before you started working on Ember. When was that?
When did I start on Ember? I think my first commit to Ember was in August of 13. I think. I could be wrong. Is that right? Yeah, because that's when Ember 1.0 came out, right? So I started working in Ember just weeks before 1.0 released. The very first version of the Builds app was something I wrote with Alex Devasardian, who I had never met at the time. It's still a crappy app, so it's great. It's getting better, though. The learning team's taking over, and they're doing a lot of good work on it. So, yeah, long time. What else? Questions? Any from the Slack? Luke.
None in the Slack.
Cool.
This may just be, the answer might just be like, yeah, that's hard, but testing like drag and drop.
I knew you were going to ask this, Luke.
Stuff.
I ignored those on purpose, man. People ask about scroll and drag and drop, and I tell you, if you don't know how to do it, then I don't know how to do it.
I mean, I've done it.
So there's a few things, though. The former test setup, the older test setup, had super weird interactions with and then and promise chaining and implicit promise chaining. And the event dispatcher was using jQuery events instead of native events, making all of this stuff massively more complicated. So I suggest that we should probably sit down and look at what it looks like today instead of like just using like out of the box, either without jQuery at all or just Ember 3, 1, or 2, and just see what it looks like and just see what the pain is. I don't know what the pain is for drag and drop specifically. There's a number of libraries out there that should be easy to import. Things like DragMock, which will emit all the events simulating the drag from one location to the other, because that's actually non-trivial to do. There's other ones that wrap up so that one's mostly a test-related thing. There's other libraries unrelated to Ember that are like around like wrapping, implementing drag and drop around elements, and all of those should be straightforward in Ember. Like implementing is not the hard part; it's the testing it's the hard part. And I think that we should just play with it and get a good scenario. I don't think it's inherently impossible to test the drag and drop. That is, I think that some focus-related things are. Because it is not always possible to simulate focus the way the browser would do when a user is interacting with it without something like Selenium or some other, like Chrome tracing or something where you're driving the browser from the outside. So you can't always emulate a trusted event by a user from within JavaScript. So, and that matters if, depending on what you're doing with the focus and whatnot, it actually, like the security protocols in the browser prevent some actions from happening the same way. Yeah, so I don't have a good answer. I wish I did. I would have included it. My experience with focus and scroll related stuff is also similar to yours. It's like very difficult to do and do correctly, especially given that until recently we were testing in like not a real browser anyways, and it doesn't even support the same events that normal browser like Chrome or Firefox would. So now at least we fixed that. But
maybe I can ask you a meta question around that. So I have some focus tests and some scrolling tests that as long as the browser is, as long as the tests are running in the browser and it's in the front and I don't not messing with it, then they pass.
Yeah.
But if I background it and do something else while I'm waiting for the test to run, fail. If I move my mouse, like in the test.
I mean, I presume you know why that's happening.
Yeah, I get it. So the question, the meta
is like the browser itself doesn't actually allow you to focus. Some browsers don't actually allow you to focus if the browser itself is not focused, right. Which seems totally legit to me. Like how are you focusing an element if the browser itself is not focused? It doesn't make any sense, right? So I understand why, but it's super trolly in your test to like flip like Alt Command Tab or something to another window, and now your test failed.
Right. So I think the meta question is just like coping strategies for like what would you do with those sections?
So there's
write them and then comment them out.
There's a couple of things. There's at least 2 or 3 different scenarios that I've done. Some of them are better. Some of them I feel bad about, but also shipped and I'm done with it. So the first one is just you can guard the test to only run if there's focus, right? Like it's kind of annoying. You have to make sure manually that it works at least when you focus them. But it's totally fine if you know the test isn't going to pass when it's not focused to just wrap the test in an if. It doesn't feel great, I agree, but like it doesn't pass, and it doesn't not pass because there's a bug in your software. It's because of a browser limitation that actually seems reasonable. It's not even a bug in the browser. It's just the way the browser works.
I remember doing that for Phantom.js.
Yeah.
This test doesn't pass in Phantom. If.
Yeah. So that's one thing. Another option is to set up something. So depending on why you care about focus, you can set up either mocks or fake services. Depends on how your application is structured. You can essentially simulate focus for the specific focus tests and act like you are the browser sending the right events at the right times. Also doesn't feel great, but at least your tests are running all the time. And you could even do a mixture of the two things and have like a fake collaborator when there isn't focus, and then use the real thing when there is. For example, in Ember Test Helpers, we have this exact problem when we're clicking. Like when you trigger click, there's actually a series of events that fire, like mouse down, click, mouse out. Like there's a whole bunch of events. Focus, I think, is also fired in there. Sorry. And the order in which they fire changes based on whether the browser is artificially focused or truly focused. And so we try to, in our tests, actually enforce the order as if you're a regular user and you're normally clicking. So we have some logic in there to detect whether, like, if the document is in focus or not, and you have to trigger the events differently. I don't remember off the top of my head what the difference is, but it is in the click code. It's not hard to follow. It's just it's firing a focus in manually instead of, so when you click and you trigger the click event, if the browser is focused, it will fire the focus in. If it isn't focused, it doesn't. So you have to manually send the event or something like that. Yes, sir.
If someone want to help out with maybe improving the developer experience of running tests and like the test runner UI and things like the global notifications that one of those add-ons provides, like what would be a good way for them to help?
So there is a dev testing channel in the community Slack. It's a great place to to join and chat. It's lower volume. It's mostly like meta about the testing framework and harnesses and stuff. So it's right down that alley. So that's a good place to start and talk. I'd suggest that a person like that likely has a bone to pick and has a pet project that would be a great start anyways, that would make their lives better. Usually that's what I would always tell someone, pick something that annoys you and make it better. And this is no different. So I think I think in some cases, like adding new default add-ons, like that might need to be an RFC, or changing the queue unit runner, well, that's going to be a PR to queue unit, right? Or we change and we wrap it differently, or something like that, right? All of that is it's easy enough to do, but there's different places, different targets for all of those efforts, right? Like for example, if it's outside the normal queue unit runner itself, and it's instead using like something like you want to change the doc container, the little container that you see your app in, to be in an iframe in a separate window and communicate with WebSockets or something. That seems great or cool or something. Like that goes to like Ember QUnit or Ember Mocha if you're using Mocha, that kind of thing. So the answer is not simple, but the easy answer is jump into Slack, talk to people that are also excited about the things, and say what you're interested in, and I guarantee you people would love to have help.
Cool.
Yes, sir.
I'm gonna propose, if it's okay with everybody, that we wrap up now out of respect for the venue, but that we continue the conversation across the street at Croton Reservoir, which is not a reservoir, but a pub. And thank you to Rob. Thank you to Alex and Christina. Thank you to Movable Link for hosting. We will be back here the fourth Thursday in May. Check out Meetup for details. Thanks all.